The machine gun on Okinawa. It was the rain that I remember first. A thick, choking rain that clung to your skin, soaked your boots, made your fingers slip on the trigger. It mixed with the blood and the mud, turned everything into a sickening, rust-colored sludge. Okinawa had a way of getting under your skin like that, literally and figuratively. By the time you realized how deep it had sunk in, it was already too late. They said this was the last island before Japan, the final stop before we stormed the mainland. But looking at it then, crouched behind the rusted remains of a blown-out truck, all I saw was hell. A different kind than what I'd seen on Polilio, but hell all the same. My name is Tommy Red Harrison. I was a machine gunner with the 1st Marine Division. 30 pounds of steel, brass, and fury sat in my arms. The Browning M1919, a beautiful beast that had kept me breathing more times than I cared to count. It wasn't a rifle you carried for the fun of it. It was a weapon for men who knew they were already dead and just wanted to take as many bastards with them as they could. We were dug in on a ridge overlooking a valley the boys were already calling Meat Grinder. I didn't like the name, but I liked the truth in it. Every night they came, waves of them, screaming, charging, sometimes with rifles, sometimes with nothing but bayonets and guts. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting because dying here was better than surrendering. That night, the sky was ink black, the kind of dark where shadows don't exist, just a blanket of nothing pressing down on your skull. We had warning, 20 minutes of shells pounding their lines, flashes of red and orange lighting up the hillside like some demented fireworks show. It wouldn't stop them. It never did. Then the whistling, a high-pitched, bone-deep wail that cut through the rain and the thunder. I knew that sound. Banzai charge. I swallowed, hands steady, finger resting on the trigger. The first shapes emerged from the darkness, hunched, sprinting, then more and more. There's always the same. You told yourself not to think of them as men, but it didn't matter. When you're staring into their eyes, seeing their teeth bared in rage or fear, you know the truth. They're scared, just like you. The first burst ripped through the rain, my Browning spitting fire. The tracers cut a swath through the charging mass, bodies crumpling mid-stride, arms flailing as they were yanked backward by unseen hands. The others didn't stop. They never did. To my left, Mitchell was swearing, jamming another belt into his .30 cal. Behind me, someone screamed. Probably Phillips. He'd been jumpy all day. A figure was on top of the trench before I could process it, blade flashing. I pivoted, squeezed the trigger. The recoil punched against my shoulder, the weight of the gun a familiar anchor in the madness. Another wave, another burst. The night blurred into gunfire, smoke, and rain. I don't remember when the shooting stopped. Only the silence that followed. Thick, suffocating. And then the realization. The bodies weren't just out there. They were in here. One of them, face half gone, lay slumped against the mud wall of the trench. His fingers twitched. I stared at him. He was no older than me, maybe younger. Rain dripped from his shattered helmet onto his cheek, washing away the blood. His mouth moved, but no words came. I reached out before I realized what I was doing. His hand snapped up like a viper, grasping my wrist. I yanked away, stumbled back. The night swallowed him whole. Morning came like a thief, stealing the shadows but leaving behind everything else. The wreckage, the bodies, the questions that no one dared to ask. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still thick with blood and water, a crimson sludge that sucked at my boots as I moved through the trench. Phillips was dead. His throat had been opened sometime in the night. No one had heard a damn thing. No screams, no struggle, just the wet gurgle of a man realizing too late that he wasn't going home. Mitchell found him first, his eyes wide and white in the pale morning light. "They're in the trenches now," he muttered, voice hollow. "They're getting in." He wasn't wrong. The night before had proved it. The line wasn't a line anymore, just a suggestion. Every inch of ground we held, they took back with knives and silence. I looked at my hands, dirt and blood caked under my fingernails. My knuckles were bruised. I didn't remember why. "Gunny says we're pulling back to the next ridge," Mitchell said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Says they're sending flamethrowers up to clean this mess out." I nodded but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Flamethrowers wouldn't change a damn thing. They'd burn out the tunnels, maybe cook a few of the bastards alive, but the island was honeycombed with caves and trenches. For every one we torched, 2 more would open up. The dead stayed where they fell. No time for graves, no time for prayers. Just rifles over shoulders, packs slung on backs, boots trudging through the mud. I kept my Browning close, the metal cold against my skin. The jungle was watching us. I could feel it. The wind moved through the trees in strange ways, carrying whispers that weren't ours. The island had a heartbeat, and it wasn't beating for us. We made it to the ridge by nightfall. The ground here was rocky, uneven, pockmarked with craters from our own artillery. We set up fast. Sandbags, foxholes, a skeleton of defenses that we all knew wouldn't hold. I found a spot near the edge, overlooking what used to be a rice field. It was nothing but ash now, a charred wasteland where nothing moved. I set up my gun, checked the ammo, wiped the rain from my face. And then I saw it. A figure standing alone in the field. He shouldn't have been there. No one should have. The last of the Japanese we'd fought had been driven into the hills, or so they said. But he was there, clear as day, standing among the wreckage, staring straight at me. I lifted my Browning, sighted in. He didn't move. No weapon. No uniform. Just standing. Watching. My finger hesitated on the trigger. Then he was gone. No movement. No sound. Just the gone. I swallowed hard, wiped my eyes. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the island was getting to me. But that night, when the screaming started again, I wasn't so sure anymore. The screaming came first. Not the usual kind, not the war cries, not the hoarse, ragged shouts of men charging to their deaths. This was different. This was terror, raw and real, clawing its way up from someplace too deep for words. I was already behind my gun before I knew what I was doing. The others were scrambling, Mitchell cursing as he fumbled with his ammo belt, Gunny shouting orders that no one could hear over the noise. The jungle in front of us was shifting, something moving through it, but no one was shooting, because we couldn't see them. The ridge was silent, the rice field below empty. No movement, no shapes. Nothing but the wind pushing the scorched earth back and forth like some slow, restless tide. And yet, the screaming continued. Then came the flares. They burst overhead, casting the jungle in ghostly, flickering light. Shadows stretched, twisted, writhing against the trees like something alive. And in that moment, I saw them. Not running. Not charging. Crawling. Dozens of them, maybe more, slithering on their stomachs through the mud, through the ash, through the bodies of their own dead. Their faces were painted dark with soot, eyes wide and wild, bayonets clenched in their teeth. No guns, no explosives, just blades. And they were already too close. Mitchell fired first, his rounds chewing through the earth, kicking up chunks of rock and flesh. Then the ridge erupted, the roar of machine guns drowning out the screams. My Browning bucked against my shoulder, spitting fire down the slope. And still they came. I saw one of them take 3 rounds to the chest, keep crawling. Another dragged himself forward with one arm, the other hanging useless, half gone at the shoulder. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They just kept moving, inch by inch, closer and closer, their blades catching the flare light like 1,000 hungry teeth. Then the ammo ran dry. Mitchell was shouting, but his voice was just noise. I slammed a new belt into place, yanked back the charging handle. Too slow, too damn slow. Someone to my right went down, a gurgling choke followed by dead silence. And then they were in the trenches. The next moments blurred together, chaos and steel and blood. The Browning was useless now. Too big, too slow. So I grabbed my sidearm, fired point blank at a face that wasn't even human anymore. The .45 kicked, the body dropped, another took its place. Mitchell went down. I didn't see how. Just turned and he wasn't there anymore. The knife came out of nowhere, catching the moonlight an instant before it would have caught my throat. I twisted, felt the burn as the blade bit deep into my shoulder instead. I hit the ground hard, breath knocked from my lungs. The figure above me raised the knife again, face painted in blood and dirt, eyes burning with something I couldn't name. And then he stopped. Not because of me. Not because of anything I had done. Because of the sound. A low, groaning wail, rising from the jungle. Something old. Something wrong. Even the ones still alive, the ones still fighting, froze. The earth trembled beneath us. The trees swayed, though there was no wind. And for the first time since this island had become my personal hell, I saw fear in their eyes. Then they were gone. Just like that. Vanishing into the dark, slipping back into the earth like they had never been there at all. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. I don't know how long I lay there, staring up at the black sky, listening to the jungle breathe. I don't know how I got out of that trench, or how I made it back to the others, or why I was still alive when so many weren't. But I do know this. That island was never ours. Not for a second. And whatever we were fighting out there in the dark, it wasn't just men.